Trump's approval rating is falling faster than his promises can be fulfilled. The president's return for a second term began with a bang. Make America great again. Stability, victories, revenge for lost greatness. He promised tough management discipline, job growth, and real protection for ordinary Americans. It seemed that a charismatic leader who had already turned the system upside down would give the country a new beginning. But after just 1 year, his approval ratings took a nosedive. Recent polls show a historic low, about 37% approval, the lowest rating for his entire second term. The trend is clear. Enthusiasm is waning even among Republicans, and independents, who were counted on as the voice of common sense, are flocking to the camp of the dissatisfied. Today's public opinion figures sound almost like a death sentence for the White House. In a number of polls, Donald Trump's approval rating has fallen to 37%, while disapproval has reached 63%, which is the lowest average rating of his second term so far. Less than a year ago, immediately after the inauguration, the situation was noticeably more even. Approximately 50% approval versus almost 45% disapproval. Since then, the trend has been consistently negative. By the middle of the year, support had fallen to 44 and 45%, and in some polls, below 40%. For Trump, this is a sign of a loss of emotional connection with part of the electorate. His previous reliance on colorful rhetoric and rally energy is working less well, while the demand for measurable results, prices, wages, security, and manageability is growing. Based on current figures, in order to even come close to parity of around 50-50, the administration needs to gain around 12-15 points of support, a task that requires not just one successful news story, but visible improvements that people will feel in their everyday lives. If we look not only at the average temperature, but also at audience segments, the picture becomes even sharper. The deepest rift is among voters under the age of 30, with only 20% of this group approving of the president's performance. This is not just a weak spot, but a complete failure, and the dynamics over the year are also negative. Young people are falling into the minus faster than others, reinforcing the overall decline. It is in the youth segment that the effect of noise fatigue is strongest. Expectations of rapid improvements are met with a sense of stagnation in prices and incomes, and it is more difficult to sell the argument of wait a little longer to this audience. There are also cross-cutting themes that are widening the divide, and they also indicate which groups are leaving. The overall picture is as follows. The economic engine is sputtering, prices are rising faster than wages, schools and universities seem unmanageable, the migration system is like a door that slams shut and jams, and foreign policy is off course. In other words, the dashboard is flashing red lights in all key areas, and confidence is not growing. This suggests that audiences for whom the daily cost of living and manageability are key criteria are systematically attributing responsibility for the deterioration to the administration. In practice, it all boils down to one thing. People evaluate the government through their wallets, and this is where the main gap begins. The economy has always been Donald Trump's calling card. He built his political image on the role of a successful businessman who knows how to multiply capital and make America prosperous. But today's indicators suggest otherwise. For most voters, it is the state of the economy that has become the main irritant and source of dissatisfaction with the current administration. Inflation and rising prices for gasoline, food, and housing have become a constant topic in the American news. Average household spending has increased by about 15 to 18% compared to the beginning of the second term. Even with nominal income growth, real purchasing power is declining. This is particularly noticeable in everyday life. Filling up a car has become more expensive, supermarket bills have risen by another $20-25, and mortgage rates are hovering around 7%, a level not seen in many years. People see that money is flowing out faster than it is coming in, and this feeling is automatically transferred to the president. An additional complication is that Trump's economic measures, tariffs, renegotiation of trade agreements, emphasis on protectionism, are no longer perceived as a lifeline. On the contrary, small business owners are increasingly insisting that import duties have made raw materials and components more expensive, and that retaliatory measures by partners have hit exporters. Whereas the slogan, "America First," used to inspire a surge of national pride, it is now associated by some with rising prices and job losses in manufacturing. The labor market is a particularly sensitive issue. Formally, unemployment remains low at around 4%, but the subjective picture is different. More and more Americans are taking temporary jobs or working 2 or 3 jobs to cover their rising expenses. The Consumer Confidence Index has fallen by almost 10 points in recent months, and expectations for economic improvement have fallen to historic lows. For Trump, this is a blow to the core of his political brand. Therefore, the drop in ratings is not a momentary reaction to headlines, but a direct consequence of the fact that the economy has ceased to play in his favor. Americans are willing to turn a blind eye to diplomatic rough patches or high-profile conflicts, but not to rising food and housing prices. And until people feel real relief in their daily lives, no statements about record achievements will restore the president's lost credibility. If the economic agenda has become the main source of irritation, then Trump's political style and manner of governance have been the catalyst for this discontent. People expected a firm hand and predictable consistency from his second term, but he is increasingly associated with chaos, improvisation, and endless internal friction. The president, accustomed to the role of showman, has once again relied on dramatic gestures and loud remarks, but now this approach is backfiring on him. Over the past year, the White House has entered a crisis phase several times due to management miscalculations. First came a series of mutually exclusive immigration decrees, which caused confusion at airports and a wave of lawsuits. Then a tariff war broke out. The administration gradually increased duties without a clear mechanism for compensating businesses. The culmination was a protracted shutdown of federal agencies. Hundreds of thousands of civil servants have been without pay for weeks, and the economy is losing billions of dollars. Public opinion interprets this not as a sign of toughness, but as an indicator of the government's inefficiency. The internal structure of the team proved to be no less destructive. Endless personnel changes, dismissals of advisors, contradictory comments from the press service. All this creates a sense of managerial chaos. In 1 year of the second term, more than 30 key figures have been replaced, from ministers and press secretaries to national security advisors. At the same time, each new scandal is louder than any substantive decisions. As a result, one gets the impression that the White House exists in a state of permanent crisis. Trump himself, possessing the intuition of a charismatic leader, often prefers direct confrontation to diplomatic detours. His public spats with Congress, the judiciary, and even his fellow party members paint a picture not of a unifier, but of a politician who wages war on all fronts. In a climate of public fatigue from constant tension, this style becomes toxic. People no longer see him as a figure capable of compromise and de-escalation, and increasingly perceive him as a source of unpredictability and internal instability. The drop in ratings reflects precisely this mood. It is not so much a matter of antipathy toward the person, as it is disappointment in his leadership style. People expected his second term to be a period of maturity, balanced decisions, a pragmatic course, and managerial discipline. Instead, the country is witnessing the same whirlwind of emotions and decisions on the fly. Americans may respect Trump's energy and drive, but today, predictability and clear rules are in demand. Where chaos and improvisation dominate, trust does not arise. It inevitably melts away. Against the backdrop of record low ratings, Trump responds, as usual, not with excuses, but with an offensive. His line remains the same. If reality differs from expectations, it is the fault of fake polls and hostile media. In his trademark style, he claims that most Americans are actually happy with his course, and that any ratings are, in his words, fake news from left-wing analysts. Such statements regularly appear on his Truth Social page, where he accuses CNN and the New York Times journalists of trying to fabricate the impression of a crisis. However, even among his allies, this tone is causing concern. Republican strategists admit that constantly denying obvious problems alienates moderate voters. When the president, instead of analyzing the reasons for his falling support, insists that everyone is lying, it looks like a sign of weakness, not strength. It is particularly alarming that even conservative media outlets, which until recently supported him unconditionally, are now beginning to cautiously distance themselves. Fox News talk shows are increasingly featuring arguments about the need for a sober view and restarting the economic agenda. Nevertheless, Trump continues to appeal to his core, approximately 35–37% of the electorate who remain with him, regardless of the circumstances. He organizes rallies where thousands of supporters chant, "We are with Donald," and "America first." For this audience, ratings are secondary. They see Trump not so much as a politician as a symbol of resistance to the elites. The White House actively plays on these sentiments, claiming that polls and criticism are part of a witch hunt against the real people. But outside this loyal base, the effect is the opposite. Independent voters interpret aggressive rhetoric as a sign that the president is out of touch with reality. They feel that he is talking exclusively to his fans and is no longer listening to the country. Even some moderate Republicans are increasingly calling for a mature conversation and a review of political tactics. The main problem with the White House's response is its purely emotional nature. In response to falling ratings, the president's team is not proposing any concrete steps, either economic or administrative. Instead of a clear program, it is fighting enemies. But the numbers are relentless. Even the most charismatic leader cannot outplay statistics. And while the authorities argue with the polls themselves sound more and more convincing. The decline in Donald Trump's approval rating is already beyond a personal crisis. It is becoming a factor that is changing the balance of power across the entire U.S. political landscape. When a president loses the support of the majority, a chain reaction is set in motion. The party wavers and loses confidence. Congressmen try to distance themselves, and the opposition gains additional momentum. All this is unfolding before our eyes. The Republican Party, which for many years relied on the powerful figure of Trump, now finds itself in an unpleasant dilemma. Continuing to support a president with a 37% approval rating means sharing responsibility for his miscalculations. To take a step aside is to risk losing the core of supporters for whom Trump remains the main symbol of opposition to the liberal establishment. Many regional officials are already choosing a cautious tactic. They do not publicly argue with the president, but they are also in no hurry to directly link their campaigns to the White House. In the upcoming midterm elections, this position could be a decisive factor. History shows that when a head of state's approval rating falls below 40%, the ruling party loses ground in Congress. This was the case with George W. Bush. It happened with Barack Obama. And now the same scenario looms over Trump. Low confidence in the president is spurring his opponents. The Democrats are already building their campaign as a kind of referendum on his performance. If the economic situation does not improve and the conflict with Congress cannot be diffused, forecasts predict that the Republicans will lose dozens of seats. Internal tensions are growing within the party itself. The younger generation of conservatives, particularly those focused on pragmatic economics, are increasingly talking about the need to reformat Trumpism. A number of influential senators are avoiding joint public appearances with the president, and donors are increasingly redirecting funds to alternative figures, those who are capable of maintaining the rhetoric of strength, but without constant scandals and turbulence. The decline in ratings is also reflected in foreign policy. As his domestic support weakens, Trump's negotiating position looks less convincing. Allies doubt his political stability and the durability of his course, while opponents prefer to wait and see, hoping that the White House will be forced to make concessions in order to restore its image. As a result, foreign policy is becoming less predictable, which further alarms voters within the country. Donald Trump's low approval rating is not just a set of numbers. It is a mirror reflecting profound shifts in American society. At the beginning of his political career, his slogans sounded like a protest against bureaucratic inertia, like the voice of ordinary people tired of the system. At that time, Trump embodied anger, energy, and hope. Today, however, this protest has dried up. What was perceived as a challenge to the elites increasingly looks like a manifestation of fatigue, irritation, and even anxiety. The change in mood among those who remain in his camp is also telling. Whereas before there was confident, proud support for their leader, now there is an increasingly apologetic tone. Yes, he's harsh, but there's no alternative. People remain loyal not out of enthusiasm, but out of inertia because they see no convincing replacement. For any politician, this is an alarming signal. Enthusiasm is the main driver of support, and when it fades, even the core of supporters begins to gradually dissolve. Donald Trump's approval rating, which has fallen below 40%, is no longer just a number in sociological reports. It is a turning point, beyond which political turbulence and a rethinking of the very logic of the Trump era begin. The main reason for the current crisis is the loss of a sense of control. When Trump first entered the White House, he was perceived as a man capable of taking control, restoring order, and giving Americans confidence in the future. Now that image is fading. The economy is worrying, politics is divisive, and the administration's internal communication is increasingly reduced to defensive rhetoric. The drop in ratings signals that America is tired of constant fighting. Society needs predictability, not spectacle. Concrete solutions, not slogans. For Trump himself, the current moment could be either a turning point or the beginning of a fatal trend. U.S. history has seen examples of a return of trust. Ronald Reagan in the early 1980s, Bill Clinton after the 1994 campaigns. but their successes were based on compromises, reforms, and a willingness to admit mistakes. Whether Trump is ready for such a rethink is an open question. So far, his reaction remains the same: accusations against the media, political opponents, and polling agencies. However, unlike in 2016, when anti-elite protest was a powerful unifying force, today voters are waiting not for conflict, but for results. The current indicators are not the end of the story, but a clear turning point. If the president and his team manage to shift their focus, restore economic optimism, and reestablish normal dialogue with society, the decline can be slowed. If the course of confrontation continues, these figures risk becoming not a bottom, but a starting point for further decline. Trump has already proven that he is capable of defying predictions, but now he faces a battle not only with his opponents, but also with his own shadow. The image of a leader who promised to make America stronger, but ultimately became a symbol of accumulated fatigue.